It was a hot, sticky afternoon in Lagos, the kind that made the city hum with a different kind of energy, one that only a true Lagosian could understand. The office was buzzing with voices as Tom sat hunched over his desk, scrolling through his laptop with little enthusiasm. His mind wasn't on the presentation he was supposed to be working on. Number. His thoughts kept drifting back home. Delilah, his wife, and their newborn daughter Betty. Tom's eyes lingered on the photograph of his family on his desk. He couldn't help but smile, though there was a knot in his stomach. Betty, born just a few days ago, was already a bundle of joy and responsibility. But as any parent would tell you, new life brought new struggles. He wasn't sure how he was going to balance work and being the kind of father his little girl deserved. Bills had already started stacking up: hospital bills, rent, car repairs that had long been ignored. But there was no time to rest, not with the kind of pressure Miranda was putting on him at work. Tom! A sharp voice rang out, cutting through his thoughts. It was Miranda, the office coordinator. Tom's shoulders tensed. Here we go again. These slides are terrible, Miranda barked as she walked into the room, barely glancing at Tom as she snatched the presentation off his desk. You're really letting us down here. The font is all wrong. The design is a disaster. Tom opened his mouth to defend himself but stopped. It wasn't worth it. He had heard these complaints before. Miranda had her standards and nothing less would do. But Tom knew that his mind wasn't entirely focused on work right now. He had a family at home that needed him, and the office could feel like a distant world sometimes. But Miranda didn't care. She wasn't concerned with his struggles. Listen up, everybody. Miranda's voice echoed across the office, commanding attention. I'm your coordinator, and I'm going to fix Tom's mess. You all need to step up and raise your standards, or maybe you shouldn't be working here. Tom could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him as Miranda stormed out, the sting of her words still hanging in the air. He clenched his fists. He knew this job wasn't ideal, but it was all he had right now. He didn't have the luxury to quit, not when his family depended on him. At home, Delilah could sense the tension in Tom's voice when he called her. She had been taking care of Betty all day, and the weight of the responsibilities was already showing on her face. But when Tom walked through the door that evening, he was a different person. He wasn't the stressed out intern trying to juggle his new life. He was a new father, nervous but proud. How was your day? Delilah asked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she bounced Betty gently in her arms. It was okay. Miranda's on my case about some presentation I did. But we'll get through it, Tom said with a forced smile, though his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. How's Betty doing? She's perfect. Delilah smiled softly, her eyes glistening with love. Do you still want to name her Elizabeth? Tom's face softened as he looked at their daughter, barely a week old. Yeah, Betty sounds perfect for her. Elizabeth it is, but Betty is who she'll be. They both stared at Betty for a moment, their tiny bundle of joy who had just turned their world upside down. But with the joy came the reality. How would they support this new life? How would they balance their jobs and being the parents they wanted to be? How would they manage the bills that were stacking up and the rent that needed to be paid? That evening, as the house settled into a quiet hum, Tom pulled out a letter he had been meaning to discuss with Delilah. His heart raced as he looked at the words on the page. A manager position had opened at his company. Delilah glanced over at Tom as he sat down next to her. What's that? It's a job description for the manager role they're offering, Tom said, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. if I get it. I could double my salary. I've been thinking about applying for it. Delilah was silent for a moment. She looked at Tom, a mixture of pride and concern in her eyes. Tom, that's great. But can we handle the stress? You already seem stretched thin. Tom looked at her, his heart pounding. He knew she was right. His life was already a balancing act. But the salary increase would mean stability. It would mean better health care for Betty. It would mean they could afford to fix their car, pay the bills, and not have to worry about how long it would take to get by. The next day, Tom's mind wasn't on work. He had spent the night looking over the job description, thinking about what it would mean for his family. He knew he had to go for it. But Miranda, ever the obstacle in his path, had other plans. Tom, I need those slides done now. Miranda snapped again, clearly irritated. You should be putting in the effort. You've been slacking. Tom's jaw tightened. I've been working my ass off, Miranda, but right now I've got bigger things on my plate. Miranda shot him a look, but Tom didn't care. The weight of his family was much heavier than any office politics. That night, when Tom got home, there was a different kind of tension in the air. Delilah had been taking care of Betty all day, but the bills were starting to pile up. Tom had hoped to hide it from her, but the bills were everywhere. He walked into their small living room, and Delilah looked up, her face grim. Tom, we need to talk. Tom's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Delilah held up a stack of bills. You said these were nothing, just a few bills. But now we're behind on rent. We're falling behind, Tom. I need you to be honest with me. We can't keep doing this. Tom's heart sank. He hadn't wanted to worry her, but now he realized that keeping things from her had only made the situation worse. I'm sorry, Delilah. I should have told you. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Tom, we can't keep pretending everything is okay. We need a plan. Tom looked at her, feeling like a failure, but then he made a decision. I'm going to apply for the manager role. I need to do this for us, for Betty. Delilah looked at him, her face filled with a mix of support and worry. Do it, Tom. You've got this. We're in this together. As the day drew to a close, Tom knew one thing for sure. No matter how hard things got, he had a family to fight for. Betty, Delilah, and even Miranda's harsh words couldn't stop him. He was ready for the next step. Whatever it took, he would give it his all. The following morning felt heavier for Tom than the others. The weight of his responsibilities was now evident in the bags under his eyes. As he stepped into the office, the hum of voices and the sound of keyboards clicking away were drowned out by the buzz in his mind. Miranda's words echoed in his head. The slides, the manager role, the bills, his family, everything felt like it was stacking up on him, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. Morning, Tom, Felix greeted him as he passed by. Felix had always been the easygoing colleague, always smiling, always the one to make light of even the toughest situations. Today, though, Tom could barely force a smile. Morning. His voice was tight, and he could feel the tension in his neck as he tried to focus on his first task of the day. But his thoughts kept returning to Delilah, to Betty, to the bills piling up at home. How was he supposed to balance everything? Tom! Miranda's voice called from across the room. Tom didn't have the energy to argue today. She stood there with a smug smile, holding up a fresh set of slides. I need these revised by the end of the day. I don't want any excuses. Tom nodded, his frustration bubbling under the surface, but he bit his tongue. There was no time for fights today. By midday, The usual buzz of office gossip seemed distant. Felix had pulled him aside to discuss the manager position. Tom, I heard you're thinking about applying for that manager role. Tom nodded, unsure of what to say. Yeah, I'm considering it. I need to make more money. Felix studied him for a moment before speaking again. You're a good worker, Tom, but if you're going to go for it, you need to step up. Show the company you're ready. You've got the drive, but it's more than that. You've got to play the game. Tom looked at Felix, who was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a serious look on his face. You think I'm ready? Felix smiled, but there was something deeper in his eyes. I think you'll be great, but it's not just about doing your job. It's about making them see you. You've got to stand out, Tom. It's a tough world in the corporate space. You can't let people like Miranda steamroll you. The rest of the day passed in a haze for Tom. His mind drifted between the office and home. The hours stretched on endlessly as he fought to focus on the presentation slides Miranda demanded. But every time he tried, his mind would wander back to his family. Delilah was struggling, and so was he. His worries about their financial future clouded his every thought. After work, he walked to his car, staring at the worn out vehicle. He was still trying to figure out how to fix it, but he was stuck. Delilah had told him not to worry, but how could he not? There was a baby to take care of, and things weren't looking good financially. As he made his way home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing. Delilah deserved more than this. Betty deserved more than this. When Tom arrived home, he found Delilah sitting at the kitchen table, holding a few more bills in her hand. Her expression was one of exhaustion, but there was also a quiet strength about her. How was your day? She asked, not looking up at him. Same as always, Tom replied, sitting down beside her. Miranda's on my case again. She's really pushing me to finish these slides. Delilah sighed. Tom, I know you're working hard, but I can see the toll it's taking on you. You're stressed and I'm worried about you. He looked at her, guilt rising in his chest. I'm trying, Delilah. I really am. Delilah placed the bills on the table and met his gaze. Tom, we're in this together, but you can't do it all by yourself. She paused, looking down at Betty, who was in her crib, peacefully sleeping. We need a plan. I can't keep carrying this weight on my own, and you can't either. Tom felt the weight of her words settle heavily on him. He had been so focused on doing everything for them, he had neglected to share the burden. But he knew she was right. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about them, their family. I'm going to apply for the manager position. Delilah, I'll make more money. We can pay off the bills, fix the car, and get our life back on track. I know it's a big step, but I have to do it. Delilah smiled, though there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. Tom, I believe in you, but you need to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup. The next morning, as Tom sat at his desk, he was more determined than ever. The pressure to succeed weighed heavily on him, but he knew what was at stake. His family needed him, and he couldn't afford to fail them. At that moment, Miranda barged into the office again, clipboard in hand. Tom, I need those slides done, and I need them done now. Tom felt the anger surge up in him, but he managed to keep his cool. I'll get them to you, Miranda. His voice was steady, but in his mind, he was already planning how he would stand out for that manager position. He had to make his mark. This was his time. That evening, after a long day at work, Tom returned home with a new sense of purpose. The weight was still there, but he was ready to take on the challenge. Delilah greeted him at the door with a tired smile. How was your day? Better than it has been in a while, Tom said, walking into the kitchen. I'm going to apply for the manager role, Delilah. It's time to take control of my future. She hugged him tightly, relief in her voice. I knew you would, Tom. I'm so proud of you. That night, Tom stayed up late, reviewing the job description again, writing out his application. It wasn't just about the salary increase anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could make it, not just for him, but for Betty and Delilah. They were his world now, and he was going to fight for them. But what Tom didn't know was that there were bigger changes coming. Changes that would flip his life upside down in ways he couldn't yet imagine. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Tom decided to take the first step toward a new future. He'd spent the last few days in a whirlwind of internal conflict, but now, with everything weighing on his shoulders, he knew he couldn't go on living in limbo. The job he had, intern, no longer fit. He had outgrown it, and he needed to show it. For Delilah, for Betty, for himself. The office was buzzing with the usual hustle and bustle when Tom entered. His thoughts were focused entirely on his decision. Today, he would apply for that manager role. He had to. Good morning, Tom. Felix greeted him with his usual bright smile as Tom walked to his desk. He could always count on Felix to lighten the mood, even though today Tom could barely muster a smile. Morning. Tom's voice was tight, but Felix didn't seem to notice. Did you hear about the new client we're meeting later this week? Felix continued. They're bringing in a lot of business. And if the deal goes through, the company could skyrocket. Tom nodded absent-mindedly. He couldn't focus on anything other than the manager role now. He had to make sure his application was perfect, something that would catch the eye of the higher-ups. He was ready for this next step, ready to show Miranda and everyone else that he was more than just an intern. The day passed slowly. Tom spent every moment between tasks, updating his resume, and perfecting his cover letter. He had decided to apply, but he also knew that he had to do it on his own terms. He couldn't just be another face in the crowd. His resume would need to shine. During lunch, Felix sat down across from him, a large cup of fufu in one hand, a portion of pepper soup in the other. I can see you're deep in thought, Tom. What's going on? Tom looked at Felix for a long moment. He knew Felix meant well, but it wasn't easy to explain everything that was going on. I'm applying for the manager role. I feel like it's time. Felix raised an eyebrow. That's great, Tom. But listen, if you want this, you have to go for it with everything you've got. Miranda, she's not going to just hand over the position. You need to show them why you're the best fit. Tom nodded. He'd heard all this before, but it felt different hearing it from Felix. Tom knew he needed to make an impression, not just with his work, but with his character. The role wasn't just about the paycheck. It was about proving he was capable of more, that he could provide a stable future for Delilah and Betty. As the afternoon wore on, the stress of the application and his conflicting responsibilities started to wear down on Tom. He hadn't been able to fully focus on work, but Miranda didn't care. She wanted results, and she wanted them now. Tom, the presentation is due today, Miranda snapped as she stood over his desk, arms crossed. I need those slides by the end of the day. Tom felt his patience begin to fray. It wasn't Miranda's fault. She didn't know what was happening at home, didn't understand the strain he was under, but it didn't make her demands any easier to swallow. I'm working on it, Miranda, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. It doesn't look like it, she responded, her voice dripping with condescension. If you want that manager position, You need to prove it. Stop acting like an intern. Tom clenched his fists beneath the desk, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. He had to stay focused. He couldn't let her get to him. Felix had already warned him that Miranda would be an obstacle. He needed to push through it for his family, for Betty, for the future he envisioned. As soon as Miranda walked away, Tom got to work. He poured his energy into perfecting the slides, determined to at least complete one task today. He knew there was a lot riding on it, but this was a fight for his future, and he wasn't backing down. That evening, after work, Tom was drained. But when he got home, Delilah was waiting for him, looking up at him with that warm smile that always made his heart swell. The house wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was home. "How was your day, love?" Delilah asked, holding Betty in her arms as the baby slept peacefully, her small hands curled into tiny fists. "It was all right. Miranda's giving me hell at work, but I finished the slides she wanted. I applied for the manager role, Delilah. I'm serious about this. I'm ready for it." Delilah's face softened. "I knew you would, Tom. You're capable of so much more than just being an intern. I'm proud of you." Tom smiled, but there was a lingering doubt in his mind. He didn't feel like he had done enough yet. There was so much more to prove. "I just hope they see that. I hope they see me." Delilah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "They will, Tom. You just need to keep showing up. Keep doing your best. And don't forget, you have a family who believes in you." Later that night, Tom stayed up late, staring at the job description again. The words blurred before his eyes as he thought about what was coming next. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. This was his chance to provide more, to give his family the life they deserved. As he clicked the submit button on his application, he felt a sense of determination wash over him. He was ready. But little did he know, the real challenges were just beginning. Miranda wouldn't make it easy for him. And the job, the responsibility that came with it, would test him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The next morning, Tom was back in the office, more focused than ever. As he walked through the door, Miranda was already waiting for him, her arms crossed. "Tom, I reviewed your slides," she began, and Tom steeled himself for whatever was coming next. "They're better than expected, but we're not done." Tom nodded. He knew Miranda wouldn't be satisfied until everything was perfect. But he didn't mind. This was his chance to prove himself, even if it meant working late nights, even if it meant dealing with Miranda's demands. As the week went on, Tom's work-life balance became even more strained. He continued to push through, completing assignments, attending meetings, and dealing with Miranda's relentless expectations. But in the back of his mind, he knew that his path was now set. He would fight for the manager role. He would fight for Delilah, for Betty, and for everything they dreamed of together. By the time the weekend arrived, Tom was physically and emotionally drained, but there was a new energy in him. He knew the next step in his life was closer than ever. By the time the weekend came around, Tom felt more like a shadow of himself. His body ached from the late nights at work, his mind cluttered with the endless to-do lists Miranda kept piling on him. He had done it. He'd submitted his application for the manager role, but now it felt like the hard part had just begun. The pressure to prove himself wasn't going away, and neither was his mounting anxiety about providing for Delilah and Betty. When he woke up on Saturday morning, Delilah was already up, tending to Betty as the baby babbled in her crib. The soft glow of the morning light bathed the small apartment in warmth, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just work anymore, it was everything. He had entered into a kind of survival mode, trying to balance everything with no real support system, except for Delilah. Good morning, love. How'd you sleep? Delilah asked, her voice soft as she adjusted the blanket around Betty. The little girl's chubby hands gripped the edge of the cloth as she wiggled in her sleep, unaware of the weight of the world on her parents' shoulders. Tom forced a smile. Morning, babe. Same as always, but I'm thinking today's the day. Delilah raised an eyebrow, setting the baby down gently in the bassinet. The day for what? I'm going to talk to Miranda today. I can't keep going like this. I need to know what's next. I need something solid for us, for Betty. Tom's voice was filled with determination, but there was an underlying uncertainty that Delilah could sense. Delilah walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. You've been working so hard, Tom. But whatever happens, just remember, I'm proud of you. You're doing everything you can. But you need to take care of yourself too. Tom nodded, but the feeling of guilt gnawed at him. He wasn't doing enough. He wasn't providing enough. And that scared him more than he cared to admit. But Delilah's words stayed with him, a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. The day was slow moving. Tom kept himself busy with errands, trying to distract himself from the nagging thoughts about his future. He knew he had to talk to Miranda to get some closure, to figure out if he had a shot at the manager position. But no matter how many times he rehearsed the conversation in his head, the words wouldn't come out right. At the end of the day, he found himself standing outside Miranda's office, the door slightly ajar, her voice ringing out like a loudspeaker, barking orders at someone on the other side. Tom, come in. She waved him in as he hesitated, his heart racing. Her sharp eyes locked on him as he walked in, and for a moment the room felt cold. What's up? Miranda asked, as if everything was a business as usual. But Tom knew better. I wanted to talk about the manager position. His voice was firm, but the nerves crept in. I submitted my application, and I just wanted to know where I stand. Miranda didn't look up from her computer. Well, Tom, it's obvious you want it, but you've still got a long way to go before you're ready. I think you need to show me more. Tom's chest tightened. He had been expecting this, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. I've been working hard, Miranda. I've done everything you asked me to, and more. But I need this position to support my family. He swallowed hard, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. Delilah was right. He couldn't keep running in circles. He had to take control. Miranda finally looked up, her cold eyes studying him for a moment. I don't know, Tom. You're good, but there are a lot of other people in the running. You need to work harder if you want to prove you can handle the responsibility. Tom's heart sank. He knew Miranda wasn't going to make this easy. She had never made anything easy for him. I'll do whatever it takes, Tom said, almost mechanically. Just let me know what I need to do next. Miranda smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile. We'll see, Tom. We'll see. That evening, Tom returned home, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Delilah was waiting for him at the door, her expression filled with concern. How did it go? She asked gently, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes. Not great, Tom said, his voice low. Miranda's giving me the runaround. She says I need to work harder, but I've been giving it everything. Delilah pulled him into an embrace, her voice soft and reassuring. Tom, you're doing your best. You've been amazing. Don't let her get to you. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. He needed this. He needed it, not just for the salary increase, but for the sense of accomplishment, for the pride of being able to provide for his family. The next few days were a blur. Tom threw himself into his work, but it seemed that no matter how hard he tried, it was never enough. Miranda's demands kept getting more and more unreasonable, and Tom felt like he was walking on a tightrope, trying not to fall. But then, on the third day after his meeting with Miranda, things took an unexpected turn. As Tom walked into the office, he noticed a strange figure standing by Miranda's desk. The man was tall, well dressed, and had a confident air about him. Tom didn't recognize him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Tom, Miranda called from her office. Come in here. We need to talk. Tom walked into her office, and the tall man turned around, offering him a firm handshake. Tom, this is Felix. He's the CEO of the company. Tom froze. Felix? The man smiled. Yes, Felix. I've been observing things around here, and I've heard a lot about you. He looked at Miranda. I have to say, Miranda, you've done a great job managing the team, but we're looking for someone who can step into a leadership role, someone who understands the bigger picture. Tom blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Felix chuckled. What I mean is, I'm offering you the job, Tom. You're the one we want. Tom's world seemed to tilt. He felt dizzy. This was it. This was his chance, the moment he had worked so hard for. But as his mind raced, he couldn't quite believe it. But Miranda, he stammered. Miranda shot him a cold look. You've been doing good work, Tom. I've seen it. I've just been tough on you to see if you could handle the pressure. Her voice softened ever so slightly. Congratulations. That evening, Tom walked home in a daze. When he walked in the door, Delilah was waiting for him, as always. But tonight, there was something different about her. Her eyes were bright with anticipation. What's wrong, Tom? You look like you've seen a ghost. Tom stood in the doorway, the words finally sinking in. I got a job, Delilah. I'm the new manager. Delilah's face lit up with joy. Oh my God, Tom, that's amazing. She rushed over to him, throwing her arms around him. I knew you could do it. But as Tom held her, he realized that this was just the beginning. The manager role wasn't going to make everything magically fall into place. There would still be struggles ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Tom felt a flicker of hope. The day after Tom received the news about his promotion, his mind felt like it was on a roller coaster. He had known for some time that the manager position was within his reach. But hearing the words come from Felix himself, the CEO of the company, had shaken him to his core. Tom had always been just an intern, a man on the outside looking in. But now he was in. As he walked into the office that morning, the usual buzz of activity seemed quieter somehow. The weight of his new position felt heavy on his shoulders. He was no longer just Tom the intern. He was Tom the manager, a title he had fought for, a title that now came with its own set of challenges and responsibilities. Morning, Tom. Felix greeted him as he stepped into the office, a broad smile on his face. Felix had been everything Tom wanted to be: confident, successful, with a presence that demanded respect. Morning, Felix, Tom replied, trying to keep his composure. He felt the eyes of his colleagues on him. But now, they weren't just looking at him as the intern. They were looking at him like a leader, like a peer. And that thought made his stomach churn with nerves. How's everything going? Felix asked, leaning against the doorframe to Tom's office. Tom nodded, still trying to wrap his head around everything. It's going all right, just adjusting to everything. Felix studied him for a moment. Don't worry, Tom, you'll get the hang of it. Just keep doing what you've been doing and don't let anyone hold you back. He clapped Tom on the back with a smile. You earned this, my friend. The day went by in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and quick decisions that Tom had never had to make before. It was overwhelming, but it felt good. It felt like progress. But as the clock ticked closer to the end of the workday, Tom found himself distracted again. Miranda was nowhere to be seen. She had been quiet ever since he received the promotion. And while Tom had expected some sort of confrontation, it hadn't come. Instead, she had distanced herself, leaving him to navigate this new role alone. As Tom was about to leave the office, he was summoned to a meeting with Felix. His pulse quickened as he entered the CEO's office. Hey, Tom. Felix greeted him warmly, motioning for him to sit. I know it's been a whirlwind for you, but I wanted to talk about something important. Tom raised an eyebrow, curious. What's going on? Felix leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. I need you to take a leadership role with the team. We've been having issues with productivity lately, and I need someone to step in and make sure things run smoothly. Tom's stomach dropped. He had barely settled into the position, and now he was being asked to fix problems that he didn't even fully understand yet. But he couldn't back down now. This was his chance. I'll do it, Felix. I'm ready, Tom said, his voice steady despite the unease inside him. Felix smiled, a look of approval crossing his face. I knew I picked the right guy. You're going to do great, Tom. That night, as Tom walked through the door of his apartment, he felt a mix of exhaustion and elation. His first day as a manager had been a success, but it was clear that he had a long road ahead. He needed to find a way to balance his new role with his responsibilities at home. Delilah was already waiting for him in the living room, a soft smile on her face as she glanced up from Betty, who was curled up in her arms. Hey, love, how was your day? Delilah asked, setting the baby down in her crib as Tom sank into the couch beside her. Tom exhaled heavily, rubbing his face. It was a lot, Delilah. I had a meeting with Felix, and now I'm in charge of making sure things are running smoothly at the office. I didn't expect it to be this intense. Delilah smiled and wrapped her arms around him. You've got this, Tom. You've always been able to handle anything that comes your way. Tom looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. Delilah had always been his rock, his constant support, and now more than ever, he needed her strength. I just wish I didn't have to work so much, Tom said, his voice tinged with frustration. I want to be there more for you and Betty, but it feels like work is taking over everything. Delilah kissed him on the forehead. I know, Tom, I understand, but you're doing this for us. You're doing it for Betty. We're in this together. Okay? Tom smiled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. Yeah, you're right. Together. The next day, as Tom walked into the office, something unexpected happened. As he sat at his desk, still catching up on emails, the door to his office opened, and Miranda stepped in, a look of determination on her face. Tom, we need to talk, she said, her tone flat. Tom's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what was coming. What's going on, Miranda? Tom asked, trying to keep his voice even. Miranda crossed her arms, her eyes narrowed. I've been thinking, I don't know if I can work under you. Tom frowned. What do you mean? I'm not happy with the way things have gone, Tom. I'm not sure if you're qualified to manage this team. Miranda's words stung, and for a moment, Tom didn't know how to respond. Look, Miranda, Tom said, standing up and meeting her gaze. I've worked just as hard as anyone else here. And if you think I'm not capable of leading, then maybe you're the one who's not seeing the bigger picture. Miranda flinched at his words, but Tom didn't back down. He had a family to support, a future to build, and he wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. Miranda opened her mouth to retort, but before she could speak, Felix entered the room. Is everything all right here? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Tom nodded, his gaze never leaving Miranda's. Everything's fine, Felix. We're just talking. Felix stepped forward, glancing between the two. Good. Miranda, I think we've discussed the changes I want to see in this office. Let's keep things professional, okay? Miranda's expression softened, but she nodded. All right, Felix, I understand. That evening, after another long day, Tom returned home to find Delilah waiting for him with a smile. How's everything going? Tom smiled back, his exhaustion evident, but his spirit lighter. It's been a rough day, but I'm getting the hang of it. Miranda, she's not thrilled, but I'm standing my ground. Delilah nodded, understanding the pressure Tom was under. I know you are, Tom. I'm proud of you. Tom looked down at Betty, who was peacefully sleeping in her crib, a tiny bundle of hope in their small world. I'm doing this for her. I'm doing this for you, Delilah. Delilah kissed him gently. We'll make it, Tom, together. As the days passed, Tom continued to face challenges, but he no longer felt burdened by them. He was no longer the intern. He was no longer just a man struggling to survive. He was a leader, and he had a family that believed in him. That made all the difference.